I think as the guys are getting mic'd up, I'll just ask them to kind of come on up. And Jason, it's been great kind of having you guys re-engaged with Guelph as well. It's been really nice to have the Digital River team join us for, again, as Gary was talking about on an earlier panel, we did our virtual Oktoberfest, which was actually a lot of fun. And your CEO, Adam, was like one of our stars, just no nonsense, here's what it's all about. So it was great to have him involved. And Howard is actually kind of one of our new sponsors. The SellPoint Digital guys are just kind of getting into the retail vertical, so I'll let Howard talk a little bit more about how that's all going to play out. But it's awesome to have people from, adjacent verticals join us. And the last man on stage, Patrick, was actually the last man on stage when we did our very last event. So Patrick had the last word at Guelph LA 2020. So I'm going to let everybody introduce themselves, and Tawny again, my bad. But yeah, so Patrick has earned the right to say the last word today in New York. However, we are guaranteeing you this is not going to take quite the long pause. So Patrick, why don't you say a quick hello, and then we'll get everybody introduced. We are going to do the innovation format in a Tech Talks format today. So the reason that we do the Tech Talks is we work really hard throughout the day to, kind of get all the experts up on stage. We try to keep things fairly strategic and tactical. At the end of the day, the end of Guelph events, people come up and say, I wish I knew a little bit more about the technology. So the Tech Talk is where we talk a little bit more about what the problem is and how we're solving it. So I think the cadence will be, we'll do a quick hello, and then Jason's going to do some slides, and I'm going to let you guys drive. So if you could hand that down to Jason. But Patrick, tell us a little bit about yourself and Avalara, and then we'll go to Howard, and then we'll wrap up with Jason.
Okay, so Ken, thank you very much. Thank you, everybody, for attending this talk. Yes, 20 months ago, when I was last on stage at Guelph in LA, a lot's happened since then. It seems like a lifetime ago, but it's a pleasure to be back. I'm with Avalara, responsible for the global trade initiative that we have with Avalara. I'll be telling you a little bit more about that later on. Pleasure to be here. Thank you.
Howard?
Yes. My name is Howard Blankenship. I'm with SellPoint Digital. As mentioned earlier, this is our first Guelph event, so we're excited to be here, and thank you. I'm the global head of sales, and we'll get more into SellPoint Digital shortly.
Awesome. And Jason, say a quick hello, and then you feel free to dive into the deck a little bit.
Yeah, you bet. Hi, Jason Nias. I'm Senior Vice President of Sales and Partnerships at Digital River. And although my company's been involved in Guelph, this is my first personal event, and I'm really happy and pleased to be a part of it. So thank you for putting it on.
Awesome. So the Innovation Showcase, as I mentioned this morning when we started off with Marquee, we were trying to look at how the customer journey has been changing, how things have looked since the pandemic began, and where we're going from here. So what we wanted to do was look at the cross-border customer journey, but the reality is what's underneath that cross-border journey is often very transactional data, and there's some interesting insights to share. So why don't you hop into the deck and just introduce yourself, and we'll go from there.
Yeah, let's do it. So what's interesting so my company that I work for is Digital River, and we've been around a long time. We were one of the early pioneers in e-commerce. And we, for many years, shied away from this concept of cross-border e-commerce because we've always kind of thought that in order to deliver a really great customer experience, you have to be as close to those customers as possible, which meant onshore inventory, local processing, local acquiring, local currencies, local. And so for many years, we kind of said, we're not the cross-border, we're not a player in cross-border, because we kind of thought of it as an experience that wasn't ideal. But the more that we dig into it, we really see it as a really big opportunity, but with an asterisk. So we think the cross-border is a huge opportunity, but if the customer feels like it's cross-border, then we've done something wrong. And so Digital River's mission in life is to really be a utility provider that provides payments, fraud, tax, and compliance, as well as some capabilities around shipping, to really make those transactions feel as local as possible. So that's what we do. We reserve our capabilities for some of the largest brands in the world. We've got about 5,000 clients, some of the examples you would see on the slide.
Yeah, we're getting our confidence monitor up here, so if we can get a little AV help. But
yeah.
Yeah, this is where you get to do the slides without looking. Do
That's
you
okay,
really
I've-
know yourself? Tech Talks.
I've done them
there
a
is
few
no-
times.
Yeah.
But one of the things about, and I feel like I'm just pitching, so I apologize, but one of the things about Digital River that's unique is the fact that we have this business model called Merchant of Record. And it allows us to really take accountability on behalf of brands to really deliver that local experience like I described before. In fact, last year we did about $3.3 billion as the Merchant of Record for the brands on this slide. And what that does is that makes us one of the 100 largest e-commerce brands on the planet. So we take that $3.3 billion and we go out and we buy the best services that any brand who was $3.3 billion would do. You use Avalara as your tax system. You integrate 26 local acquirers so you get the best payment types, the most local acquiring as you possibly can. And you surround it with other partners to really prop up the solution, to really provide that local experience, both cross-border and onshore. So one of the things that our CEO, Adam, who apparently was really fun at Oktoberfest, talks about is the 6 dimensions of e-commerce. Physical and digital, or physical products with digital services, B2B, B2C, and cross-border and onshore. So those are the 6 dimensions at which Digital River really helps brands try and satisfy their customers in every country around the world. The business model I described earlier is where we act as merchant and seller on the transaction. And not all merchant of records are created equal. In fact, one of the big advantages that larger merchants have is, again, that aggregated volume allows you to have more connectivity to payment types, allows you to get better service levels, better payment types, et cetera. So what a merchant and seller of record really do for you is it's a simple B2B transaction with Digital River, and then we handle that simple or that complex transaction with either the buyer or the consumer. And we almost act as a shield, both financially and legally, to protect your brand for things that go bump in the night. And
To jump in real quick.
Yeah, please.
Can someone work with you to be just the merchant of record or just the seller of record, or is it, kind of you get them both?
Yeah, today the solution we have is really both, and there's a lot of real benefits as to why you would do that. We are working on something to be announced at some point in the future where we're going to draw different lines as to the services we can provide. But at this moment in time, it's really our service is to act as the merchant and seller.
Got it. Okay, thanks. Sorry.
Yep. Next slide. So there are 3 real use cases. The first thing is Digital River is not for everybody. There are certain brands that just we're simply not a good fit for. But I'll tell you the 3 use cases I'd point to where we are. The first is if very large companies really want to start selling direct. And I use the AMD as an example. AMD, I think, is a $10 billion a year revenue business, and their online e-commerce business is a fraction, a very small fraction of $10 billion. Now, it happens to be a very large customer for us that's very strategic, and it's growing, and it's doing amazing. But it's really hard for large corporations to stand up and stand behind the liability created for 0.1% of your revenue. So it's in that scenario where these large corporations who've got inventory in every country around the world love our business model, and AMD is no exception. The next example is around global expansion. So if I'm being honest, doing business in your own backyard where you have scale and you have relationships can be relatively straightforward and easy to manage. It's when you have to go into countries where you don't have scale, where you may or may not have local entities, where you may or may not have the inventory. And it's in those scenarios where Digital River becomes the easy button to allow you to go to virtually every country around the world. And LG is a great example. LG operates their own payments, fraud, tax, and compliance in about 10 countries, and we help on countries number 11 through X. And so it's their ability to benefit from the scale of all of our customers by providing a really local experience without having to do all that themselves. Again, it's the intersection of where they no longer have scale. And the third is simplification. To hire a whole bunch of different payment providers, integrate in a tax system, manage a bunch of vendors, deal with the compliance and law changes, becomes really challenging. And so a company like Fitbit, who's now owned by Google, chooses Digital River to operate their back end in virtually every country around the world. So those are the use cases that we become a really good fit. And then, this slide talks a lot about how a brand perception as to how people think they can solve e-commerce, or what we do. We kind of categorize things into the payments buckets, the tax, trade, and risk bucket, and the selling entities. Most folks say, well, you know what, I'm going to go with Adyen, I'm going to go with Avalara, and I'm going to use my own entities, and I'll be fine. But the reality of it is, some of these partners have amazing services, but you still are liable for the transactions, for the remittance of tax, for PCI compliance, for the selling entities, the reconciliation. There is a ton that the organization still has to support, especially as it relates to selling where you don't have an entity. And so that's why the digital river, oh, hello, I think I lost my last slide.
No, sorry about that.
Did I? What did I do? Whoops. Anyway, that's why the digital river solution is doing so well. Is because we basically take all of those things on the previous slide and we bring our stack to solve it. And it's a single contract, gets you access to the globe. It's similar to kind of how AWS works. You could stand up your own data center and hire a bunch of people to manage it, or you could plug into AWS with a single contract, get access to all their services. We're the same. We're business model as a service. So anyway, I'm done talking at you now.
No worries, no worries. And we're going to get to a panel discussion. So yeah, Patrick, I think you've got a couple slides, and Howard's going to say a quick hello with his as well.
Yeah, thank you, Jason. So just a little reminder for those of you who don't know Avalara, what we do. We like to be helpful to our customers and our prospects in solving the four big pieces of the global tax puzzle. Item classification, first and foremost, you see that there top left, classifying those products, making sure they're compliant. You're sending things into countries and telling the governments of those countries what you're sending. Subsequently, the duty calculation associated with those products, very important to know what that amount is, especially in a DDP environment. The import tax calculation, we saw from an earlier slide in the previous panel, how tax is applied to duty and shipping. That must be calculated and must be remitted. Different countries, different rules, VAT, PST, GST. And of course, the bottom right-hand side there is the US sales tax. 16,000 jurisdictions across the US, very, very complicated. We demystify that so you don't have to worry about it. Who we work with, we have integrations primarily, over 1,000 of them, in fact. So if you're not integrated with us directly, there's a very good chance you are integrated to one of our partners. And you can see there, I've sort of spread them out by group, CRMs at the top, e-commerce platforms, our very good friends here, Digital River. We're very proud and privileged to be working with a best-in-class partner on the e-commerce platforms. POS, and of course marketplaces, a very important segment. So you can just imagine the cobweb. You know, our connections go to these organizations, 1,000 of them, and then they subsequently go to businesses that trade and use those various different platforms.
So Patrick, let me jump in for a second. So my industry analyst is coming out of me. And I know all partners are treated equal.
Yeah,
but
of course.
Are you seeing some, anything in there that's kind of popping? I mean, I know in the marketplaces, StockX, we've done some stuff with recently. Goat is one that's been coming along. But what are you guys seeing in the partner ecosystem now? Are you seeing, people gravitating for, obviously Shopify is here. We've had Shopify woven through the conversation. We're going to have a much deeper dive in LA on Shopify and their cross-border. But what are you guys seeing just from a partner perspective?
Yeah, so I see the most activity I would have thought we're seeing is in the marketplaces. What with the changes in Europe, which was touched on an earlier panel, the deemed supplier rules in Europe. So a lot of activity, a lot of changes. They bring their headaches to us. We're in the business of solving those headaches in tax calculations. I spent a lot of my time in the last 18 months.
The hot sector right there.
Yeah.
Thanks.
And then, I was reflecting on the last time I was at Guelph, which is 18 months ago, and the changes that we've seen in our world, the changing landscapes and the evolution of buying behaviors. And there's been a lot of changes, so I penned a few down here. I put them in two buckets, treaties and reforms on the left-hand side and logistics on the right. So, Brexit, spoke a lot about that, a lot of confusion. I like that slide earlier on the panel. That generated a lot of activity for us. And let's not forget USMCA. That replaced NAFTA. We kind of forget about that because Brexit was the big treaty change. But USMCA, the de minimis changes in Canada changed all sorts of buying behaviors in Canada as that de minimis rose to allow more goods in duty-free. IOS, Europe, one of those big tax reforms in Europe, the VAT exemption loopholes, 22 euros was the de minimis for VAT in Europe. That's down to 0. The Europeans are collecting as much VAT as they can, and that's okay. They're entitled to do that. But that closed off a lot of shipping lanes for a lot of companies, and created opportunities for others. The deemed supplier, and then Section 301, of course, the commonly known as the China tariff, that impacted a lot of trade flow from
Is that
from
what
Asia.
Tawny was talking about earlier, about trying to shut down all that low volume DU that comes in?
That was coming in, yeah, that's right, and apply anything over $800, right, into the US has duty on it. There was the extra duty applied on certain products from China. In fact, there was hundreds of HS classifications for which it applied. So so it's a punitive tax. It wasn't a preferential tax. It was a punitive tax.
And I remember, it was 18 months ago. It's crazy. But yeah, you were also kind of like, look out for what's coming. Is there a look out for what's coming now, or has pretty much all the regulation descended upon us already?
Yeah, I think it's all descended upon us now. It's held, Section 301 has held. It's still in place. We'll see how that changes. But we have to scramble around. I remember our content engineers, because if you do remember at that time, the US administration were going to put the tariff on. It was going to be put on Friday at midnight, and then they didn't, and they kicked it down by a week. So we had content engineers literally ready at 1 second before midnight to change all the tariffs for the calculations for products. And then it was all off, because there'd been some kind of breakthrough in discussions or whatever was going politically. And so we had to just then defer that and then wait until the next deadline, and eventually it happened. So
But those guys all made last call once that happened.
yeah, that's right. And then in the world of logistics, we saw a lot of changes. We saw heightened awareness for restrictions. I saw a slide on Saudi Arabia earlier on, but where online shopping just shot through the roof. It has everywhere, but I think they were showcasing Saudi Arabia. Of course, merchants were beginning to realize, I'm selling all this stuff online, that's great, but I'm having lots of problems with restricted products. The products that I used to be able to get into Europe or into the US or into Asia, I can't get into other countries because they're restricted in this country, but not that country. So that was a lot of confusion. Type 86 clearance, the US government's initiative for low value, low cost, very, very quick clearance, fabulous development. That was a great change. Encouraged a lot of trade into the US. De minimis thresholds, I mentioned that, changes around the world. So you've got to have your finger on the pulse. When these changes take place, you've got to recognize that in your duty and tax calculations in your basket, because you want to be charging the customer the right amount, of course. Forward inventory deployment, all the commercial airlines obviously all stopped flying. All that belly space just vanished. Merchants were having to, they couldn't get their product around. They had to put it on the water. And in doing so, you have to do that in bulk. You can't just do onesies and twosies, which means you have to forward deploy your inventory into these destination countries to meet the transit time requirements of online buyers. So there was a big change in forward deployment of inventory. And then finally, the big one, I think we'll talk about it a bit more later on, was that big move from DAP to DDP. They talked about it on the panel before. It was already happening, and the last 18 months, the pandemic just accelerated it. It just went off the charts. Contactless, cashless, I think was a word used on a previous slide, effortless, that whole transit time, that transit experience of packages was just an absolute must for buyers, and it forced merchants to comply and use various platforms and other methods to make sure they delivered that.
Okay.
Yeah, so 18 months in a snapshot. The headaches that we had to put up with.
Yeah, so I mean, it's been interesting. Did you find that, and we talked a little bit about with Sam yesterday, are you finding that these are driving some changes in fulfillment strategies as far as shifting, obviously, and feel free to hop in, guys, but, that was something that Sam had said, yeah, and, Sam's gone now, so I can tell you what he said. He basically said, stay tuned because they've got a lot of real estate guys out right now looking for kind of new places to kind of accommodate their clients, and, there is going to be a shifting EU kind of distribution map, if you will.
Absolutely. Well, I heard Jose mention it earlier on, just on the previous panel. They set up 2 inventory stocks. So rather than having everything in Europe, in Amsterdam, I think he said, and then fulfilling EU and the UK from there, well, that doesn't make sense anymore. You need duplicate inventory. So you need a warehouse in Slough or wherever in the UK to fulfill and satisfy the UK business if you want the transit time and you want that customer experience.
So when I was talking to Howard and his team, I was like, we love it when the payment folks join us because, underlying the customer journey is transaction after transaction. So, help us tell us a little bit about what you guys are seeing. Obviously you guys have been, well, I'll let you tell it, but, you've worked a lot with the airlines, so you've had very interesting changes in the data transaction flow.
Yeah. Well, let's get started. SailPoint Digital at a glance. We are both a fintech and a travel tech. 130 employees across the globe, and we focus on travel and digital. What do we do? Well, we provide a payment platform that lets merchants take control of their payment strategy, their global payment strategy. The challenge, many of you guys know the challenge, online commerce is skyrocketing and fragmentation is happening in the payment space. When that happens, it's a barrier to growth. The solution is orchestration of the payments. It does 3 things really. It simplifies, it optimizes, and it increases both the number of transactions and the number of successful transactions. SailPoint Digital has that unique payment orchestration platform. What we do that is unique is we build it, we stabilize it, we optimize it, and we build the ecosystem specific to the merchant, not our ecosystem. What does the merchant need to be successful across the globe? What do customers want? We all know this. They want flexible, they want frictionless, but most important, they want to use their preferred form of method of payment. The challenge to merchants is how do they deliver it? How do they effectively offer it up on their pages? How do they optimize it and measure it? How do they protect it against fraud? And in the end, how do they settlement and reconciliation to receive the money? Fragmented platforms, digital platforms, this may look familiar to a lot of people out there. Payments become fragmented. It becomes an inconsistent customer experience. When you have one project with a fragmented platform like this, now you have 10 projects. Weeks turn into months, months turn into years, success goes down and costs go up. Orchestration solves that by addition through subtraction. And what I mean by that is take away all those different middle layers, take away all the different integration points in one platform to access all this and gives you greater control, greater productivity. We have that one platform that orchestrates payments across the globe, gives the merchant the ability to match their markets to the commerce that's preferred in that country or that region. That's a pretty bold statement. We're one of the few people that can say that. Your acquirers want to keep you within their walled gardens. Your PSPs and your gateways are all working off different agendas. How do we do it? Well, we break it down into 4 steps. It's much more complicated than this, but if we had to break it down, we would do it in orchestration, processing, improvement, or value-added services, which makes us unique as well, and then ultimately optimizing. As I finish my slides here, you can see some of our community. We've been growing our community, obviously. This is some that are using our solutions successfully. When we started out in this process a couple years back, we said if we can answer the airline payment equation, which is most complicated we can imagine, cross-border, trans-border fees, multi-currency, multi-acquire, fragmented IT ecosystems, we knew once we solved it there, it would parlay or transport to the digital online.
Okay, so thanks guys for the opening there. So Jason, you made a really good point when we were kind of doing our prep call about, hey, the customer expectation has changed and the ecosystem's changed. Obviously, we looked at some different ways that you guys are working with clients to solve that. But let's kind of go back to that point, Jason. I thought you kind of nailed it. And, maybe we decided the customer is, not always leading us the way we want them to lead us, but we've got to follow where they go. So what have you guys seen?
Well, I think to kind of go back to that conversation, it's interesting when you look at how much brands spend in, say, their backyard, their domestic market. I mean, you can walk around New York City and you can see these beautiful stores where they romance these customers, and they treat them as a king, and they try to market to them, to message to them, and all the sessions on Guelph really highlight the level of effort that people are putting against romancing these customers. And then when you start to talk about those customers that live in another place, and they're effectively settling for what is a clunky cross-border experience where they may not have collected the right duties and taxes, or they may not offer the right payment type. It's this interesting kind of paradigm on how much people are willing to invest in customers as long as they're in the areas that they do business. And so, one of the things that we see is brands really spending a lot of time and energy focusing on making sure that the payment types are available that they would want. The fact that even if it is a cross-border transaction, that you're doing DDP or you're communicating those additional costs. You're very clear on how long it's going to take. So surprising customers in a negative way is the problem that we're trying to go solve.
I mean, that's a great way of putting it, actually. Howard, it's come up a little bit, but I wanted to do a little bit of a deeper dive into the whole kind of, buy now, pay later, and you guys have been seeing that. I asked one of the panelists earlier, is that simply a function of the pandemic? Is it a new class of customer that's coming online that needs that? Is it because people are buying things online at a higher price point that they wouldn't have bought? What are you guys seeing from the payment side?
Yeah, I think you nailed it there at the end. It's what the pandemic has caused. And the differences we see, at least in the payment space, is the drive and the expansion and rapid growth of alternative forms of payment. You mentioned buy now, pay later. Then there's e-wallets. There's bankless. And what we're seeing coming down the road, as we mentioned last time, is the cryptocurrency and open banking's already, we've got projects going underway on those. To give you another example, we have a customer that implemented an alternative form of payment pre-pandemic, $100,000 a day in revenue. Well, that was pre-pandemic. It went down during the beginning of the pandemic. Now it's come back at almost $2 million a day on this one alternative form of payment. So I know I spend more with alternative forms of payment. I use Apple Pay twice the amount I did going into the pandemic. So to answer your question in short, it's the rapid growth of alternative forms.
Well, I'm glad you brought Apple up because Apple's kind of soft selling this idea that you're just going to start paying Apple a certain amount per month for your devices, your services, and then you're just going to lock and load, and of course it'll go up and things like that. Is retail going in that direction, or is Jose going to come in with a U.S. Polo monthly subscription? And I mean, it's interesting when you look at it from a payment perspective because from an investment perspective, they like that smooth expected revenue coming in. Are we starting to see the beginning of a new way of the customer kind of paying or locking in with a brand?
Yeah, well, absolutely. So, one of the ways that brands, a lot of the folks I've listened to over the course of the last 2 days, talk about is differentiation. What is the purpose of your D2C strategy? And it's not to sell the exact same products at the exact same price in the exact same way as you sell in retail. So one of the ways that you differentiate is through services. So Fitbit is a great example, great client of ours. You can buy their device and you can augment your experience by paying for an additional access to additional data and tell you about your health. So we see it all the time. We call it IoT, how people are trying to monetize their services differently. It's a big deal.
Yeah, and the whole kind of platform as a service, which is what we started off with today. I was talking about at dinner last night, it's less about, one-offs from cross-border, and it's more about just if you're selling to the global customer, of course you have to think of cross-border. But Patrick, all the hiccups, all the challenges, all the complexities, it's been tripping up this community for a decade now. It's getting that, tax calculator right. And, we've got a lot of stuff going on in DC right now, or maybe nothing going on, depending on how you look at it. But, are we also going to see this, like, endless changes in regulations where it's going to make folks like Avalara just more and more, invaluable part of this platform as a service push when it comes to global?
Yeah, I think so. I think if we just look, if you remember the 18-month snapshot I just showed, so much change took place in 18 months, and that's just going to continue. Nations have interests, that they have, domestic economic interests. They want to protect those, rightly so. So they're going to impose duties and taxes. They're going to collect their fair share in terms of duties and taxes. So it's going to be never ending. The list of products we're undertaking, or the World Trade Organization, World Customs Organization, is undertaking 2022 HS classification changes, sweeping across the globe, products getting sunsetted, new classification codes coming up for new products, which will then allow countries to put duty and taxes on those different products coming into their countries. So it's endless. I really believe it's endless. Of course, you can do it yourself. You can sit down in-house in your organization and try to figure it out for all the 222 countries that you export to, but you'll just get yourself into a muddle, a lot easier to outsource that.
I remember Amy Morgan, when she used to speak on Avalara's behalf, would bring the Bible.
Yeah, 50 pounds.
And the 50 pounder and sit it on the table. That sold a lot of interest in you guys. I want to pull you guys into the crowd. I appreciate everybody hanging in. If there are any questions or anything like that, we've got Bree. Feel free to just kind of engage and things like that. But obviously there's a common thread to this. Is there is growing friction. There's more and more global direct-to-consumer opportunities. Where do you guys see kind of the next points of friction emerging as you've listened to all the speakers throughout the last couple of days?
Yeah,
Howard, you go first. You're
look,
on that.
okay. It's the what we see coming in our space is the multiple forms of payment, alternative forms of payment, continue to grow and grow. There's over 2,000 now across the globe, so that's causing friction in the space, especially in the cross-border fees. And we keep talking about crypto. It's not when it happens. It's not if it happens. It's when it happens, and it's going to happen. So people don't have their head in the sand, but they're letting others lead, and they will follow. And someone's going to have to take the lead on that.
Yeah, I mean, when crypto first came out, we looked at it, it was like, well, this is a no-brainer. It puts a lot of the friction, nobody's tracking this stuff. But, it's obviously, there's lots of different kinds of digital currencies. So, yeah, what are you guys seeing on the whole kind of cryptocurrency side of things?
Well, we ran a pilot. It's been a handful of years now, and we put it on, I think 1,000 sites in one of our divisions that has a bunch of SMBs that are in the software space. And I think over the course of like 90 days, we did 6 transactions. So while I have some crypto and I'm a follower of the space, I haven't seen a lot of data that this is really being used as a transactionable currency. It's more of a collectible or an investment more than at least that's what our test yielded. I'm sure that other people have more recent data than us, but we're certainly keeping an eye on the space, and we'll be ready to adapt when it becomes a hot commodity to actually transact on.
Any questions? Again, I want to kind of, whenever you start talking about crypto, you kind of opens up the conversation about the dark web, which was actually one of the last conversations we had at our last New York show. So that was 2019. One of the things that came out in one of the earlier sessions, and I was talking to Indy and some of the Signified guys about what they were calling friendly fraud, and we haven't talked a lot about fraud and things like that, but I know you guys all have to deal with that. Andy was talking a lot about, more and more, especially during the pandemic, maybe it was mistakes and things like that, but, there was a lot of fraud coming in from, existing customers, long-time customers as well, to the point where, they had to kind of create some new products. What are you guys seeing on the fraud front and, some of the other kind of darker sides of cross-border e-commerce?
I think, one of the biggest challenges we see is whether it's done innocently or deliberately, is the undervaluing of products. The commercial invoice will state one value, customs will hold it up, question it, research it, and challenge it. That puts merchants in a bad spot, and it could be done innocently. That happens, of course, but customs quite often view it through a different lens, and we just encourage our customers to get those valuations of products right, because you just end up causing yourself, you shoot yourself in the foot eventually. Yeah.
Any final thoughts on the dark web?
I wouldn't say the dark web, but I would talk about rejects and frauds. And what we're seeing is there's quite a bit of soft declines, the 2s and the 4s soft declines that doesn't have the ability to be retried, don't have the functionality. And we're building that out where you can go and try it with another acquirer. Again, the soft declines, the hard ones we don't going to touch. But so there is some opportunity to capture some of this and lower it. But that's on the way.
I love that answer, if I can just add to it. So that's one of our core value props is we've got this super acquirer network of 26 acquirers, and we see a lot of things that might look like fraud to people we're trying to sell to, but we do exactly that. We've got this kind of AI layer that tries it at Adyen, and if it fails, we try it at Worldline. If it fails, we try it at WorldPay. And just on what people thought was fraud or declines, we pick up an additional 6 to 12%, depending on the country or the currency or other things. So while people might be painting it as a fraud problem, it potentially could be soft fraud that's really an opportunity to convert it to real customers.
Awesome. And yeah, I mean, since Jim mentioned, and Jim's going to come on up, this MasterCard study we did a while ago, and that was they were like, you won't believe how many good orders get flagged and get so much money is left on the table. So hey, thank you guys so much, and Patrick, I promised that you would have the last word. So leave us with a strong parting thought.
Well, just one hope, really, rather than a thought, that it's not another 20 months until we see everybody again, shake hands, communicate, collaborate. It's a hope.
And I hope all you guys will be back in LA mid-February. So thank you guys, and thank all of you for staying and coming and everything. Appreciate it.
Thank you.